Excellent. Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you. A little bit like Chris, I should stress I'm not a meat guy. I know precious little about the industry, so I'm just trying to get my notes up here. I know precious little about the industry. Please bear with me if I use the wrong terms, the wrong acronyms, and so on. What I am, I'm a supply chain guy, actually. That's what I am. I've spent my life working in supply chains, deploying technology in supply chains from large retail food supply chains to the oil industry, to the brewing industry, and various other things. I was there when RFID was going to solve every single problem in the world, and I'm still here when IoT is going to solve every problem in the world, and blockchain is going to be the solution to every problem in the world. What I want to do today is actually want to start a conversation. That's really what I'm here to do, okay? And it's about data, and it's about IoT, and it's about the B word. And I want to talk to you about the supply chain. I see so many presentations where we talk about the provenance of a product, and you guys have been talking about it today a lot, and we talk about the data of it. And then we talk about what happens with the consumer, and we talk about that, and some of the amazing things that we see in retail. And then somewhere in that presentation, there's a little arrow that says, pass data through supply chain, right? I'm the guy that's had to build those supply chains, and frankly, I'm here to tell you that that little arrow that says pass data through supply chain is nowhere near as easy as you think it might be, okay? The reason I also want to start the conversation is I believe we're ready for change. The technology exists, IoT's out there, and the software and everything else exists. We've got consumers are now ready to start demanding this stuff. We've heard that's where the money actually comes from, the guy or the girl that walks into the shop and actually buys a product. So we know that they want this. And as an industry, the very fact that I'm here on this stage talking about this says we're ready to start talking about this. So we've actually got everything lined up. The planets are all there. Let's start going for it. And that's what I want to touch on today. There's really 3 points to it. We've got to talk about what data we're chasing, and frankly, we're not asking the right questions. We've got to start talking about the quality that we deliver, not all of the inputs that go into driving quality. How do I get quality to my customer at the price point that they demand? Okay? We've got to start talking about that. We've got to expose and demystify the supply chains, and I'm going to go into a little bit of that and talk about why this is such a complicated problem, and you need to understand some of what's going on there, okay? And then we've got to create an objectivity in our data, and it's perfect following Chris on stage. The concept of data, everyone gets nervous about it. If we can make it objective, if we can make it stand on its own 2 feet, we can start doing some of what the transport guys have been doing. I'll also stress as well, there's no one producer can do this. There's no one farmer, there's no one retailer, there's no one anyone else can solve this problem. There's no one industry can do this. We sit here as a meat industry today, the produce industry. There's every other industry who's got the same problem. No one industry is going to solve this problem either. We're going to have to stand up and work this out together. So let me go through. Let's see how we go. Let's start with the quote that I give every boss that I've ever worked for and always comes back to haunt me at some stage. Show me how you measure me and I'll show you how I behave. Okay? We chase numbers. We're born to chase numbers. That's what we do. However you get measured is what you end up doing. Whatever your bonus criteria is, whatever your profit criteria is, that's what you chase. Okay? Keep that in your head. Now look at the big picture. Who's seen the film Moneyball? Seen Moneyball? Anyone seen Moneyball? Read the book, seen the film? Great film, won lots of awards. It's actually a very true story. It's a story about a guy called Benny Beal, who was a half-decent baseball player. He became the scout for the Cardinals, okay? This is back in the early 90s. And they said, go out, go and scout all the Major League Baseball players, go and buy me a team. We want to go and win the World Series. And he said, cool, great job, I get to go and do all that, okay? But then they said, oh yeah, by the way, we're a bit tight on cash, and they gave him 20% of the budget that they had previous years. So suddenly he couldn't go and buy the big players. And you went for the guy that hit the home runs. You went for the pitcher with the fastest fastball and all these things. And he actually did some analysis on it and said, actually, what I really want to buy is I want to buy runs. Runs win games. Players don't win games. Runs win games. And they did just some detailed analysis on the data and said, what gets me runs? And actually, in baseball terms, it's whoever makes bases the most often actually get the runs. So we looked at all of the stats, and baseball is much like cricket, endless stats, covered in stats, and he said, get me the guy that gets the runs. I don't care anything else about them, get them. And he got what is arguably the most sort of ragtag team. He got them at bargain basement prices, and he put this team together. The first year he did that, he was 1 game away from winning the World Series. He changed the way that baseball recruits. He's subsequently changed the way just about every professional sport recruits, because they started looking at the value proposition of what's going. I actually believe we've got a Moneyball moment in our industry coming up, and we can choose to take it if we are, okay? We've got to change what we score, and we need to start scoring quality. We've got to score the quality that the consumer takes, okay? Now, quality can be good, can be bad. Quality is a subjective thing based on what you want to give your consumer, but we need to start scoring that. We need to start scoring that for the food industry, and you need to start measuring yourselves against that, because that's how you're going to change. And when we take that as the very basic proposition, now we've got to look at the data. Now we've got to look at the technology and say, how do I use all of these amazing tools to actually drive quality into my business and actually support so that I can place consistent quality into my business? That's kind of easy. Well, it's kind of easy to say. That's really hard to do, right? And it's really hard to do because there's a few things going on in these supply chains. And I'll come back to I'm a supply chain guy, okay? And I'm going to tell you a little about supply chains, about why that becomes so hard to do, okay? I'm going to apologize now for people who spoke earlier. Every time I see someone describe a supply chain, what we see is 4 or 5 boxes in a row, and we have a producer, and it goes to a warehouse, and it might go to another warehouse, and then it goes to a store, and then it goes to consumer. It looks really good. It looks really simple. It's very linear. That's not how the world works. That's not how supply chains work. They are incredibly complicated. We reutilize vehicles, we use machines. When you actually draw it on a map, when you look at some of the maps that we see, these are massively interconnected, moving beasts, okay? And the complexity and the scale of a modern supply chain, a retail supply chain, or any of the modern chains we work in, actually hides a lot of the underlying issues that are in there, okay? The first one, which is unique to us as a food industry, or in particularly in yours, is the concept of senescence. Your products change in the supply chain. They physically change, and that impacts your quality. Now, if I'm making pairs of jeans, I can make a pair of jeans today, I can put it on a shelf, I can come back a year later, and they're still jeans, okay? They might be out of fashion, they might be no good to me, but they haven't physically changed. We all know we can't do that with food. Senescence is the biggest single thing that sets us aside from just about every other supply chain. The way we move it changes your product. If you can't see that, score that, measure that, and track that, how on earth do you meet your quality proposition to your consumer? Okay? That's really important. That's a fundamental thing that we just don't talk about, and we've got to start talking about it. Because of the complexity of these things, we then start getting other things. Our supply chains are unpredictable. You don't know which vehicle it's going on. When you produce something, you don't know which store it's going to go to. You don't know which customer's going to buy it. You don't know which warehouse it's going to go through. Here's some news for you. Neither do the retailers. Neither do the wholesalers. They're just going in. They know they need 15 pallets of something, 20 cases of something. Right until that vehicle turns up, they probably don't know. We've driven our supply chain to be very cost-focused. We're obsessed with cost per carton, cost per pallet, cost per mile, right? So what do? What have we got? We've got incredibly detailed. We're really good at moving stuff around. Every truck goes with 24 pallets on. That means I don't know which truck it goes on, which means that decision's at the last minute. So they're highly unpredictable. If they're unpredictable, I can't plan where it's going to go. I can't put readers and sensors and figure out what it's going to do. I don't know if it's going to take 2 days, 3 days, or 5 days. I just don't know. So we've got to think about those. If I don't know where it's going to go and I don't know what it's going to go with, how on earth do I start tracking my provenance now? What if it doesn't get scanned by someone? What if it does? What if one gets really hot? What if one gets really cold? Suddenly I've shattered my quality proposition. Yes, I might have a label that says, by the way, I came from this farm or this producer or this whatever, but what good is that to me if I can't tell you how I got to where I am? So the traceability and that provenance go hand in hand with food supply chains. The ownership gets really interesting. How many times does a product change physical ownership from point of production to the time that somebody actually buys it and takes it through a till? In the most efficient vertically integrated chains, maybe twice. In most chains, you're going from potentially a farmer, and I know the fresh produce industry a little bit better, you'll go from a farmer to potentially a packing cooperative, to a supplier, which then goes to a wholesaler, which then goes to a retailer, which then goes to a retail outlet. How do I track that? What do I do with that? Everyone's got to play in that game, right? And because everyone's got that now, everyone's going to sub-optimize for their chain. Because what are they measuring? They're measuring, what's my cost per pallet? What's my stock holding? I'm academically trained in supply chains. We were taught warehousing is a sign of failure. If I look at a supply chain now, I see stocking points at every single change of ownership because I'm looking after my little fiefdom and that's what I need to do. If I'm looking from a carrier's point of view, all I care about vehicle fill. The quality of the product is, if you kick and scream, I'll worry about it. So the chain itself creates a problem. So we've got to shatter some of that and we've got to start digging through that. So how do we do that? What do? Start listening to the product. Stop looking at the chain and start listening to your product. There was a point made earlier again, and I've tried doing this. Somebody said, the data exists. All you've got to do is stitch it together, okay? I ran for a very large retailer. I was head of supply chain systems, strategy, and innovation. My job for 4 years was to look at technology in the supply chain, okay? I can tell you that you can't stitch that data together because it's unpredictable, because you don't know where it's been. I don't know. Every vehicle, when we move cold chain product, every vehicle is chilled. But I don't know which vehicle it went on, so therefore I don't know which log to go and get. Therefore, I can't prove that that temperature was maintained through the chain. I can have a pretty good guess, but I can't prove it. It's a bit like the traffic analogy is often how we describe it, okay? I can look at my phone and go, there's no traffic alerts today. Well, actually, I can probably see in glorious detail what traffic alerts there are now, but we can look at it and say the buses are on time, the trains are on time, the ferries are on time. That doesn't mean you get to work on time. That doesn't mean your journey into the office was good. That doesn't mean you're at your best when you're performing. And what's the first thing you do when you go and see family, when somebody comes into work? How's the trip? You okay? You getting there? If you're late because you stuffed up or you took the wrong turn or you had the one minor problem on there, you're late for the meeting. That's your quality proposition as an employee going down. It's no different for your product. So let's start listening to the product, okay? And when we talk about listening to the product, that means we have to trace the product through the chain, okay? We have to trace at the detail level, and we've heard today, you go next door, there's 1,000 devices, IoT devices. So we're talking, trying to find this, sorry, I've lost all the names of, devices tracking waste, right? You can track waste and actually throw these things away. The technology isn't the problem here. So now we've got to track every single product. And I've done a number of years researching this. There's 3 things that you need to track, okay? Time, temperature, and location. If you take those 3 for pretty much any food group, those are the 3 biggest proxies for quality, okay? Every single food group that we speak to will give me a glorious level of detail of what's important for their particular product. I know the mango guys pretty well. They'll talk to you about dry matter and they'll talk about bricks content. Talk to the strawberry guys, they'll talk to you about temperature and they'll talk to you about sugar. You talk to olive oil, they've got theirs. You talk to prawns, they've got theirs, okay? But we need to come in, and what happens in all of these, temperature and time are the single biggest proxies. Go back to Moneyball. It was line in on base was what won in games. Time and temperature is what controls for quality. We have to track time and temperature, and you have to track the location. Now we can see it. Now we can see everything there. And now you're all thinking about your products. Now think about the consumer side, okay? Think about your average supermarket. A small supermarket stocks somewhere in the region of about 20,000 different product lines, of which, as a working maths, about 1/3 are fresh products, chilled, quality control products, products that are affected by the chain. So 6,000 to 8,000 lines. I don't want, as a retailer, 6,000 to 8,000 different ways to measure, score, and see what happened to my product. I want one. I want one way to consume data. You're not solving for the meat industry. You need to work to a solution that solves for where consumers buy your product. You need to align with those, and we need to figure that out and how to do that, okay? Those 3 metrics solve for every fresh product. Because once you've got that, you can now apply your own data to that. You guys, I've seen some of the data in this industry is just mind-blowing. What if we take that, now we take that traceability data, now I genuinely have a full picture of the product. Now when I take it off that smart shelf, not only can I tell you the farm that it was on and how it was grown and the products that we gave it in the feed and so on, but I can tell you how it moved through the chain. I can tell you the shelf life before you leave that store. I can tell you that this is good for another 5 days in your fridge. This is really good for tomorrow. Now you can start managing to your value proposition. So that's cool, Luke. Great. Now we've got rafts of data everywhere and everyone's putting all this stuff up in the air. Where do we keep all that? I'm going to try and have this without saying the B word, because I don't actually believe blockchain is the solution, believe it or not. Blockchain is a really cool solution, but it's actually one derivative of what's out there. There is some underlying technology in blockchain that's what's really important, right? First of all, it's got to be distributed. You can't just have it in one place. No one person can own this. You don't just want one massive server sitting there owning this. This has got to be highly distributed across multiple participants, right? It's got to be private key encrypted. What that means is technical talk for your data is your data, and you control who sees your data, when they see your data, what they see it, how much they pay for it, and everything else. If you insert it and it's always held like that, it's always yours. You can control and manage for your information. You can't have a monopoly of control. No one person or entity can own this data. This is not a thing. The one great advantage that the Rhodes guys have, which we all love, right, is actually they own the whole piece of the pie. In a commercial context, we can't afford to let that happen. We've got to give individual owners. There is not one pool. We all just need to be able to see our pool through this. It's got to be objective. You can't be driven. It can't be driven by a supermarket. It can't be driven by a producer group. It can't be driven by an industry body. It's got to be standalone objective data. Because the minute it's objective, we can all now have a serious conversation with each other. If I can present you objective data that says this is how the product moved, this is the quality score that it earned as a result of that move, you can now go into your buyers and your customers and have an objective conversation. Who's treating your product better? Which of the big retailers is looking after your product better to make sure your customers get the quality that you want them to have? And it's got to be independent for the same reason. It can't be owned by anyone with a vested interest in the product that goes through the chain. It's got to stand on its own 2 feet. So that's kind of what you do. Once you've got all of that data, now you start running at it, much like the Rhodes guys. Now we've got it, just start thinking about what you can do, okay? We've played with some of this. This is not hypothetical. We've done some of this for various industries. Now you can start creating actions because we're talking about the quality. We're not just talking about what went on. Now let's talk about actions. Which stores serve my customers best? Where am I holding the most stock? Where are my time and temperature? Where are my proxies failing me? Where can I start adjusting for my quality proposition? Okay? Once you've got that, now you've got actionable data. You don't just have reports. You have the great examples that we just saw Chris showing through. Once we've got this, now we can start throwing that out to the unis and the think tanks and the incubators and saying, what can you come up with on that? And we're starting to see data from the very start of the chain right through to the supermarket shelf. Now everyone can see that, and everyone can see their view of that data. Not everyone can see all the data. They can see their view of the data. If you're selling to the 3 big retailers, you can see your product across the 3 big retailers. If you're one of the big retailers, you can see your meat, your fish, your eggs, and everything else that goes into you. There is no one data lake. There is no one pool of this. It is a distributed set of data that is owned by the owners that lets everyone interact. Okay? That's what the blockchain can really do. It's not about privacy. It's about control. So to try and close, and I'm trying to hit the big timer in front of me, my goal today is to start the conversation. Okay? And really, those are the 3 things there that I want you to take away from what I'm saying. Okay? If you don't measure it, you can't change it. It's an old statement. We always talk about it, but you'd be surprised how many times we go past it. I don't want to know how many meetings I've been to where you go in with the data, but you know, there's a subjective, I know better kind of feel that goes to the whole thing, right? We've got to listen to the product. Don't try and stitch it together. Listen to what's actually going on. And objectivity is what creates the collaboration, okay? If you're genuinely independent and there's an objective data source, then we can do that. And that will allow people to work with it, and that's precisely what the New South Wales guys have done. My last point, because, you know, we're all selling something eventually. This isn't a dream. We've been testing this for a number of years. We go live in the fresh produce industry in February next year, okay? And we'll be doing this at scale for a number of highly sensitive lines. My goal today was to tell you this is where the world is going. This is where the retailers are going. This is how they're going to make their smart shelves start working. And so all I want to do is start the conversation and tell you it's not as easy as you think, but don't worry because there are some smart people there with some solutions coming through. That's all I had to do, and I've hit you with 30 seconds spare. Is that all right for you, Sean?
Yeah, because I'll use 30 seconds.